Okay, now we're going to talk about section 2, adding and removing elements of arrays. Okay, so we're going to go through the array methods: push, unshift, pop, shift, which results in adding elements to an array, removing elements from array, popping an element off the array, etc. And then we're going to talk about adding and removing elements in a particular location. We're going to talk about delete, where you can delete an indexed item out of the array, and splice could actually remove and add elements in a particular range within the array. Okay, so adding and removing elements. Okay, so there's methods. Push. Push adds an item to the end of the array. So if you have an element with this red little dot here, and I want to add that to an array, this array is of length 2. There are 3 elements in the array, index 0, 1, 2, and I add an element to that array. It will get, let's see, push the element to the array. It will get added to the array, and it would be the last element in the array. If you do an unshift, add an item to the beginning of the array. So in that case, you have the same array, index 0, 1, 2. The length of this thing is 3, and you're adding an element to the array. It adds it to the beginning of the array. So the result is here. Both of these functions take an argument. You're pushing an element, you're unshifting an element, and both of them do take an argument. Now pop removes an item from the end of the array. So pop doesn't take an argument. When you pop, you're just saying, give me that last element. You pop it out of the array, you get a handle on it, and you're left with only 3 elements in the array. So if you have an array with 4 elements, and you go through this, you look at the length, you could pop an element out of the array each time you go through the iteration, and you could process the array. Okay, shift removes an item from the beginning of the array. So basically, it's like taking these 4 elements in the array, index 0, 1, 2, 3, and shifting them all left, and this one shifts out of the array. So you're left with these elements. And yes, it's a little bit confusing. Yes, using them is probably, if you use them a lot, then you remember them. Because I always get unshift and shift mixed up, but shift is always a shift, and one element winds up coming out of the array, and unshift is actually putting it back in. So it shouldn't be that confusing, but to me it's a little confusing because I guess I should use some of these things a little bit more than I basically do. There's a lot of different ways to do some of the things, and basically when I'm processing an array, typically I don't like popping anything off the array. Typically I process it, and I still want to preserve that array structure, and it might not be memory efficient, but bottom line is I do need it later on in executing the code, and so there's a lot of times you're in a situation where you don't use these things even though they do exist. Okay, if you look at a run simple method, you have an example where do a constant employees equal John and Mike. So I'm using the array literal to define employees, and then what I could do is I push Peter to the array, and so I could push a string to the array. So I do employees.push Peter. So, and then I do an unshift, and I add Jill to the beginning of the array. So basically, when I go to log the array, I could have JSON.stringify here if I had some space, but what you'd see is Jill, John, Mike, and Peter. So I added Jill to the beginning, I added Peter to the end. Now if I go and pop an element, I could get the last element. And then what I could do, and say the removed element is last element, the removed element is Peter. Now if I log the employees array, you'll see Jill, John, and Mike because Peter was popped. And like I said, the good application of this is you give me an array with 1,000 elements in it, and I'm going to process each element in the array. And once I do that, I don't need the array anymore, so I could keep popping until I'm finished. Okay, so this is your example of push, unshift, logging of arrays, and how to use an array literal. Okay, so adding and removing elements at an array location can be done this way. I have this removing items method, and I have this devices array. I use the array literal to say, okay, I have an iPad, an iPad Pro, an iPhone, and an iMac, and I log the devices, and you see the devices logged right here, right here. And then what I do is I delete devices 2. This is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and I delete that one. What happens is it becomes undefined. So my array winds up getting logged as iPad, iPad Pro, iMac. But notice when I go to access devices 2, it logs as undefined. So we're looking at something that looks like this. So just keep in mind that when you do a delete, you're making that element undefined, and the array still has an undefined element in it. Okay, so you could remove items using splice. Okay, so now I have this devices array with using the array literal. I defined devices, and I really should put constant in front of it. I think I might even get a transpile error here. Keep that in mind. So when I go to log devices, I show the devices iPad, iPad Pro, iPhone, and iMac. And then I do a splice from elements 1 to 2, and basically what's left is iPad Pro and iPhone. It removed the second and third items, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so the removed items are iPad Pro and iPhone, and devices is now iPad and iMac. So basically, I remove these two elements out of the array. I'm telling you that I removed the second and third item using devices splice. 0 is the first item, 1 is the second item, and 2 is the third item. So I am doing, when I do a devices splice, I am removing the second and third item. And the removed items I logged because I basically, when I did the splice, it gave me an array of the removed items. So I went and logged those, and I could actually show you them. And then when I looked at the devices, it showed me that I have an iPad and an iMac. And then I also, what I could do is I could do a splice on 1 and 2. And add in headset and Amazon Echo. This is doing a delete and an insert at the same time. And if I did that on the original on the array that is existing right now, basically what I would get is, because my device is iPad and iMac, so the delete 1 and 2 went and deleted the iMac because that's the element 1, and then the element 2 didn't even exist, so that didn't matter. But it kept the iPad, and then it added the 3 elements: headset, Amazon Echo, and light bulb. So the bottom line is with Splice you can do add and remove at the same time in a particular range in the array. Okay, so let's take pictorially see what this means. So notice there's no gap. Everything collapses, right? So if you have a devices array and you delete and then did a splice on 1 and 2, it would take index 1 and index 2, remove them, and give you this resulting array with iPad and iMac. If you did a splice on just 1 with the original array, it would remove the first index and everything after it. So it'll give you iPad. And if you do a delete, you could also do an insert. So here I'm deleting 1 and 2 index, and I'm adding Echo. So what the result is iPad, iMac, and Echo. So it did a delete and an insert. So Splice is a very, very powerful function of an array. So I'll say method of an array. And so now we're going to look at some examples. We'll look at the array project. We'll look at 2 functions which show removing items and removing items with Splice, and we'll go through those examples.